I want to take you now to Parliament, and the minority there claims that governance in the country is Amali North MP Hassan Suini says the NHIA, the Road Fund and other agencies are unable to get approvals to disburse funds as a result. He says this is resulting in Ghanaians struggling to access quality healthcare, among other services. He asked that the president must sit up and make the appropriate appointment so the country can make progress. He's been speaking to my colleague, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, in Parliament.
For government business is the decisions that are taken at board levels, because many ministries operate with agencies under them, and these agencies are the implementing arms of the ministries. So for example, you go to the National Health Insurance. If we are going to hold, say, the Minister of Health responsible for some implementation lapses as far as our policies on health is concerned, the National Health Insurance is key. And if you do not have a board in place that will facilitate the day-to-day running of the institution, as currently is the case, you are going to have, facilities that are offering health and expecting payments suffer, because their debtors will not, their creditors will not give them the luxury of time, and even if they do, it's going to come at a cost. And so you have many health institutions that are currently turning away patients because the National Health Insurance Secretariat owes them, and they are not able to pay because there's no board in place. Same is happening at the Road Fund Secretariat, where many road contractors are burdened by loans that they took from banks, and are burdened by the monthly interest that accrue on those loans. Yet they have finished their work, submitted their certificates, and government is unable to function because there's no road fund board in place. And it is the reason why the system is simply not functioning as we speak. It doesn't look like this is a government in a second term. I mean, some of these slow decisions are tolerated when there is a transition from one party to another in governance. But in this case, you have the same president, you have the same vice president, you largely have the same ministers who have all been vetted and approved. And so you wonder why it is taking this long for these boards to be constituted, for government business to run.
It's been 6 months when it comes to the second term specifically. Yeah. Deputy ministers are now being vetted, which Parliament has not even completed approval of those. Isn't it fair that you would want to complete that leg of the process with deputy ministers before then you move on to the boards and other agencies?
The constitution of boards have no relevance as far as, have no relationship as far as the deputy ministers are concerned. You only in some cases need to do that in consultation with the minister. And the ministers are all in place. And so the deputy ministers have no role as far as the constitution of boards are concerned, where even the deputy ministers represent their ministers on boards. They are there in a representative capacity. So the ministers, once they are in place, can even be used to constitute the boards, where they have to be the representatives on the board. And if their deputies are finally approved, as we are undergoing the process to do so, they also take up their positions on those boards. So there's simply no reason why the president and his vice should allow the country to ground to a halt, as is the case.
So that's your view, that the country has virtually ground to a halt?
Nothing is happening. You go to various institutions and agencies and people just come to work and, warm the table, sleep in some cases, and, escape to do some other private business because nothing is happening.
Nothing is happening, he says. And that's Hassan Suini there, speaking to my colleague Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, who will be joining us subsequently live from Parliament. But let's hear what else has been happening in Parliament. The Deputy Minister Designate for Communications, Ama Poma, has defended a government's decision to order mobile telecommunication companies to re-register all SIM cards in the country, insisting it's in the national interest. The minority has criticized the move, saying it will be a waste of resources. Ama Poma says the move will help curb crime. But then the minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, disagrees with the re-registration. He says it's been limited to Ghana card alone. Listen to them speak at the sitting of the committee today.
So I think it's very, very important for us to do the SIM registration with an ID that is traceable. For example, now with the Ghana card, I believe they have our digital addresses and all other things are being merged into that card. So whoever gets a SIM card would be very mindful of what he or she uses the phone for. So I think it's a very good idea.
This is not more because we have the privilege of the Minister for Communication, who is a member of our committee sitting in, and our colleague Poma, Donald Poma, will be assisting her. We all need to improve because we are seeking the good of our country. One, when you undertake a SIM registration exercise and you narrow it only to people with national ID card, when it has not covered the national population, that will be problematic in terms of what you want to achieve. Now, two, you also observe that when you undertake a SIM registration and you don't have deadlines, anywhere in the world,
session that this week that we've seen this week, you know that some of the vetting has taken sometimes about 4 hours, sometimes 6 hours. Well, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo will be joining me live from Parliament to tell us what else came up at the vetting and also to reiterate the concerns being raised by the minority in Parliament. Now, that is a position that has been held by the minority for some time. The minority leader, Haruna Idrisu himself, has had chance to comment on this matter, saying that the president ought to appoint members of the governing boards. Which of these stories excite you, and which of these stories have you have given you food for thoughts? You want to share that with us on on our WhatsApp line right now, so we can share it with the rest of the world. Joseph has joined me right now. Hello, Joseph. Joseph, let's begin with the position by the minority that the inability of government or the president to appoint governing boards of these state institutions is bringing governance to a standstill. I mean, he did give you some information in that interview we just played. The leader himself did mention something like this. Have they had any responses in Parliament from the majority, of course?
Essentially, even for MPs on the majority side, in conversations with them, the indication they gave is that this is a demand that's kind of fair to make in terms of how quickly these boards need to be established in order to allow for government business to. At the level of Parliament itself, not much is happening in terms of government business. So then for the last 2 weeks that the House has been sitting, a lot of the focus has been on statements that MPs make on whether constituency-specific issues or other issues of national importance that then just get other MPs contribute to without exactly approving any bills, without necessarily approving any specific legislation. Not a lot of government business is happening, which to a certain extent they are linking to the absence of these boards when it comes to the various state agencies. And on both sides, they would want to see some efforts being made to get these boards in place as quickly as possible, so government business, both at the level of Parliament and even when it comes to various agencies, would be able to progress smoothly.
Let's talk about the vetting that went on today. A bit of a banter there with the minority leader and the deputy minister there about SIM re-registration. But her session was pretty short. Why so? How
come her conversation specifically did not take too much time? There's actually been the vetting session so that then things don't drag too much, but other MPs and for that matter other deputy minister designates who've appeared before the committee have spent, let's say, getting to an hour. Like the deputy minister designate for foreign affairs, that's Kweku Amprechum, he spent about an hour, but in Amapome's scenario, looks like MPs didn't have a lot of questions that they wanted to raise with her, and the indication was that a lot of the issues that needed to come up had previously been addressed by her minister herself, that's SLO, so which is how come that conversation was quite...
Well, did she manage to impress them with her answers as far as the Ghana card usage for the SIM re-registration is concerned?
The minority leader, Haruna Idrisu, who raised the question, in the course of the conversation, virtually came to agree that to a certain extent the registration was important, because then he alluded to the situation that happens in certain countries where without even your passport, if you're a foreigner, you'll not be able to get a new SIM card, and or except that his main concern had to do with the limitation to the form of identity, which was being limited to the Ghana card, which was something that he felt was actually not the right thing that needed to be done, and that there needed to be the expansion in terms of the identifications that need various schools, including the new Drabin school, and what government's plan in that regard is in terms of ensuring that schools are connected to the internet, and that various agencies do have functioning IT facilities. And she again gave the assurance and the promise that she would work with the minister to ensure that that is done. She's not the only one who's appeared before the committee. The deputy minister, who is headed to the Foreign Affairs Ministry, Kwekwa Mprechum, also appeared before the committee. He responded to questions on a range of issues, including what is being done to ensure that Ghanaians have access to passport offices, and even when it comes to regions that have huge populations, there would be more than one of the passport offices being established there. So then he went on to respond to that question and give that indication. There was a question to him about an incident that happened back in 2009 when the NPP left power initially, because then he used to be the deputy ambassador to India then. And one of the minority MPs, Al-Hassan Suhini, raised an issue with an investigation into an incident of rice importation that he got invited to the BNI to come respond to questions on. And you recall that this is a case that eventually the foreign minister then, back in 2008, Akwesi Osei, was eventually put before court in connection with it. And Mr. Mprechum said that he was surprised that himself, despite being invited to the BNI, he wasn't put before court over that particular rice importation issues. And for him, it was a bit of a disappointment, because he says he was specifically directly involved in it, and so then he didn't understand why the NDC government were satisfied to a certain extent with the responses that he gave. And then there's been two other individuals who's been vetted today as well, including the deputy minister designate who is headed to the finance ministry, and one other individual. And so the committee is rounding up its session for today, and next week they would continue with the vetting of 4 of them on Monday, and the rest of the days, even as they race against time, to ensure that all the 38 deputy ministers or so are vetted before June the 15th.
Finally, Gakpo, did anything else happen on the floor of Parliament today?
On the floor itself, there was the conversation around the business that's been outlined for next week. You recall this long-held conversation around a motion to allow security agencies and also violence that happened during the election. It's been on the table for a while now. On the floor of the House today, the indication was given that it's one of the issues that the House will pay close attention to going into next week. And the indication was again given that the vetting that has been done of the first batch of deputy ministers, a report on that will be made available at the plenary for the necessary approval to be done, even as the committee continues vetting the other nominees. And so the House actually adjourned after just about an hour or so of sitting.
Correspondent, he joined us live from Parliament with all that's been happening. So vetting of some 4 deputy ministerial nominees so far, the issues that have come up, you know, the re-registration of SIM cards so that you will be able to make your phone calls. While you're doing that with the Ghana cards, apparently the minority leader has some disagreements that has come up as well. We've also told you about the story of protesters clashing with police earlier today. Well, what are your thoughts? Share that with me on WhatsApp number 0540109009. Now 0540109009.